Week 13 of Aon's Public Affairs podcast was recorded July 1st, 2020.
Hello and welcome to the Aon's Public Affairs podcast. Daniel Sirota, week 13 out of Aon's office in Chicago. I am excited to be joined by a colleague based in Chicago with me, Stephanie Schneider. Stephanie is the Senior Vice President, Commercial Strategy Leader for Aon Cyber Solutions. Stephanie, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
And Stephanie is an avid podcast lover, so I'm excited to get her on. Stephanie, let's dig in here. There is a pandemic, as we know, going on across the world. Organizations are really going to have to start reopening, start thinking about, or they may have already been reopened, but they're going to need to start thinking about other issues that may be affecting them in the long haul. One of them is cyber. What do you think organizations need to understand about their exposure overall around the cyberspace?
So if anything, I think that the pandemic has hopefully highlighted to organizations how important their technology infrastructure is to run their firm. We saw some organizations that were very well prepared to be able to pivot to a fully distributed remote workforce. We saw other organizations that frankly were doing it on the fly, some with greater success than others. But really, I think that it's just helped to underscore the importance of technology, no matter what industry an organization is operating in. We all kind of collectively need technology to run our businesses in 2020. And from that thought, you really have to focus on if technology is that critical to run the business, cybersecurity needs to be just as critical because it's cybersecurity that's protecting that technology and really, frankly, allowing the business to run. We have seen no slowdown in ransomware attacks in 2020. Frankly, I think we've seen some acceleration due to the pandemic. Unfortunately, bad actors will act badly and they will take advantage of every situation. And what a great situation to take advantage of. We have a global pandemic on a scale we've never seen, impacting society in a way that we've never seen in modern times. So the bad actors have been out there. They've been sending phishing emails purporting to be from, either from health agencies, frankly, even from one's own company's IT desk, with malicious links in them, with malicious attachments, trying to get a foothold into networks so that they could execute on ransomware attacks or some type of business email compromise attack. So uptick in frequency and severity of attacks that we've seen on a basis of a pandemic. And certainly it does take organizations longer to be able to respond to these types of attacks when there is a fully distributed workforce, including IT security. I think it just really serves to underscore how critical cybersecurity preparation is and how critical cybersecurity awareness training is for employees.
I think you brought up a really good point. Most of the news, as we all know, is around COVID. You see little bits here and there on ransomware. If it was even, I'll put it in quotes, the Zoom attacks that could happen or other things on WebEx or anything else that you would see on the news at random point. How do companies approach cyber risks, especially now in your view? I know Aon has done reports, white papers, but I would be interested to kind of hear, your perspective on during this time that we're dealing with. How do you approach it?
So I would say when it comes to cybersecurity risk, there is no one-size-fits-all approach. You have a lot of different organizations that are frankly on very individual cybersecurity journeys. You have some organizations that are very sophisticated and have been very focused on cybersecurity posture over a great many years. I would say that, those industries such as financial institutions, healthcare, hospitality, retail, they've been more heavily regulated in terms of the amount of information that they have, credit card information, healthcare information, personally identifiable information. So they likely are more sophisticated in terms of their overall posture because of the regulation. However, you have a lot of other industries that, frankly, are using technology on a greater and greater basis to run their business and haven't necessarily, because of the lack of regulation from a cybersecurity and privacy standpoint, haven't necessarily focused to that same degree around cybersecurity for the technology that they're using to run the business. If you look back to 2017, we saw the WannaCry ransomware attack. We saw the NotPetya destructive malware attack. And I think those two attacks, I mean, they happened a couple years ago, but at the time they really did serve to focus a lot of organizations, manufacturing, transportation, logistics, life sciences, food, ag, and bev. The list goes on. But organizations in those industries who hadn't really thought about cyber risk and its impact on running their organization. But, to pull back for your question, as there is no one size fits all approach, it really is up to organizations in terms of where they want to start improving their overall posture. We have a concept and a white paper that we put out that's called the Cyber Loop. And what the Cyber Loop is it's kind of a methodology, if you will, for organizations to start thinking about the best way to address cyber risk. They can enter the Cyber Loop at assessment, assessing their overall cyber risk posture, looking after potential vulnerabilities. They might want to learn about quantification. What is the potential balance sheet impact from some type of cybersecurity breach or disruption? They may want to go out and purchase insurance. Cyber insurance is a great way for organizations to protect their balance sheet against financial loss. And frankly, they might want to enter an incident response. They may have an incident, and that's going to force them into a situation where they do have to come into the cyber loop at the less ideal point, responding to an incident. But I think once we do see organizations have some type of incident, they realize how important it is to invest in their overall cybersecurity posture. So, the whole concept of the cyber loop is you enter into the loop, and as you circle around this loop between assessment, quantification, insurance, and incident response readiness, you continually glean more and more data and really can make better decisions overall for the company from a cybersecurity standpoint.
The loop is an interesting concept. And where do you see most people coming in now? Within COVID, within this pandemic, where is like the most popular starting place we're seeing employers kind of jump in? I know you brought up the full spectrum, which Aon has capabilities of being able to support employers in. But during this pandemic, where do you see most of that starting?
I would say insurance and incident response readiness are where we're seeing a lot of entry points. Insurance is a great, like I said before, it's a great protection. And even if it's a starting point, it is a financial backstop against all different types of cyber attacks on the organizations. It protects against the liability. It protects against regulatory fines and penalties. It protects against the financial loss of a business disruption event. It can fund a ransom for a ransomware attack. It can also fund computer forensics costs, which are critical during any type of incident. Incident response readiness, though, I think many organizations are recognizing that that's critical. Having a company on retainer to be able to respond to an incident is important. You don't want to be negotiating a SOW at the point that you have an incident. Time is of the essence. So you don't want to be arguing over commas and ands and language. You want to be able to have a company on retainer that can come in and help you respond immediately.
We've had essential workers kind of within a lot of these organizations been working through this whole pandemic. We have organizations now starting to open more and more. We've seen it in the state of Illinois. More companies are getting back to work, meaning office work. Are you seeing that there is a reduced cyber risk now for a lot of those companies that are now starting to reopen, or what is your overall take there?
I would say that there isn't a reduced cyber risk. Cyber security risk is one of these things that's really amorphous. It's always shifting. The bad actors are always a step ahead. And frankly, I feel like collectively organizations are always trying to play catch up. But I would say that really there's no, we continually talk about returning to work. And I would say there's really no returning to the way things were before, to the way that we all worked before. I think the distributed workforce is certainly here to stay. I think we're going to see a lot of organizations reduce their real estate footprint because they recognize that using technology, they can continue to have employees work from home, and it creates a lot of efficiencies and saves organizations a lot of money. So I think that we're going to continue to see organizations invest in greater amounts of technology to continue to support a distributed way of working. And for that reason, I would say that cyber risk is definitely not going to wane or decrease. I think that we're going to continue to see cyber risk increase. We're going to continue, as we have seen looking back, we've seen the attack vectors change. I think in the future, if I had a crystal ball, I wish I knew what the hackers were going to be doing next, but they've had a lot of success with ransomware. That's where they're making all their money. And frankly, they're going after the low-hanging fruit. And they're going to continue to do that in the future. When you have employees sitting at home who may not have done individual cybersecurity awareness training, especially focusing on work from home, I would argue that possibly less than 10% of organizations have offered any type of explicit training on how to work from home and what are cybersecurity best practices. And we're human, we're fallible, and we're always going to be the weakest link because we're moving too fast, we're distracted, we have kids doing e-learning at home or home from camp because camp's not running. And, inevitably someone, even people that can be trained, can still make mistakes and click on something that's going to impact the network.
And Stephanie, giving the environment, giving to what we're seeing there as potential expense budget cuts for a lot of these employers, you think small, medium, big, as they go down the lane of trying to figure out how to stay afloat. How do people, invest in this for their organization in the long run? I think you brought up there's different trainings, there are different ways to get your employees to understand how work from home is. A lot of employers are going to be looking at this as an opportunity to your point, switching do they have that big space that they used to have? We've seen a lot of the tech companies tell employees to stay home and being able to work from home. How should organizations plan for that?
Organizations just need to take a step back and they need to kind of break down what is a very complex problem into a set of steps that they can work towards. We actually have a great white paper that we put out, which is a top 10 cyber governance for boards of directors. And really the whole concept of this top 10 is like, if you're going to do nothing else, do these 10 things to make sure that you're protecting all different aspects of your organization from a cybersecurity standpoint. I think one of the unique things about cyber is that it impacts an organization in so many different ways. And frankly, I don't think that there's enough people within organizations that are thinking about things from a cybersecurity perspective, because this isn't something that just sits in the realm of risk within an organization or within the realm of IT within an organization. There are touch points that are all across an organization because we are using technology so much that individuals that are looking after, let's say, the intellectual property of the organization, trade secrets of the organizations, they need to think about how is that information being protected within the network. As organizations look to do any type of merger or acquisition activity, whoever's involved in that needs to be thinking about, well, what's the due diligence from a cybersecurity perspective of that target company? Are we ensuring that we're not potentially buying a breach because we're buying an organization that may have had a breach and may have a bad actor in their environment and nobody knows the better? Even when you get into retirement plans, people don't tend to think about retirement plans from a cybersecurity perspective. But the fact of the matter is there's large sums of money that are being held by third-party custodians, and our organizations focusing on the cybersecurity controls around how that money's held. And, is there a potential that there can be a breach because there could be some type of falsification of information and then draining of funds? So, even executives at an organization, the individual executives of the board can be a target. And they could be a target outside of the four walls of the organization because they travel a lot. They have kids. Kids, are on social media. There's all kinds of things that companies need to think about, which aren't even necessarily like the bread and butter of kind of IT security's focus. So, we're really trying to get organizations to think bigger when it comes to cyber risk. I mean, I think certainly the pandemic has hopefully forced organizations to really think about cybersecurity risk and the technology they're using. But, I would really argue that cybersecurity risk is so much bigger than, just like focusing on a remote workforce. It's really trying to look across the entire organization for those kind of less appreciated exposures, because that's what the bad actors are trying to do. They're trying to find a way in and they're after money. So how can organizations think differently? I'd suggest your listeners could download our 2020 cybersecurity risk report, because that's actually what we focus on, those less appreciated areas of cyber risk that are really impacting organizations.
For all the listeners out there, please look at the description. We'll have the link there for folks. And I want to make sure we also have the white paper, because I do think it's important for folks to really dig in on this. Stephanie, you're a great leader within Aon. Thank you for all the work you're doing, especially this busy time during a pandemic. I'm sure you're getting constant calls as employers start preparing for that return to work, but also preparing and continue to, enhance the remote working exercise, more broadly for their organization. So, Stephanie, I hope this was a good first experience podcast for you.
This was awesome. It was super fun. And thank you for having me.
Well, and anytime, I hope we can get you to come back, maybe to discuss after the pandemic and kind of what employers are looking towards if this pandemic ends soon, which I'm hopeful to be able to get you back on. So thank you, Stephanie, for joining the podcast.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Next week, we will be joined by one of our clients to really dig in on what's going on with the overall gig economy. Thanks for joining the podcast, and look forward for you joining next week.
This information is a resource for Aon clients and business partners. It is intended to provide general guidance of potential exposures and is not intended to provide legal, regulatory, or medical advice. Due to the dynamic nature of infectious diseases, Aon cannot be held liable for the guidance provided. We encourage listeners to seek additional information from credible sources. Thank you.